I grew up believing that vulnerability was something to be carefully managed, like money in a trust fund. Always safeguarded, never carelessly spent. My father, an esteemed Boston attorney with a cool-headed reputation, preached that emotions were weaknesses waiting to be exploited. My mother, a brilliant surgeon, insisted that precise control of my schedule, my temper, my reactions, was the only path to success. And so, for much of my life, I mastered the art of smiling politely while locking every fragile piece of myself behind well-fortified walls. But then came Emily, and Emily changed everything. I suppose it's only fair to start at the core of who I was, who I still am in certain ways. My name is Olivia. I come from a family that prizes intellect above all, a lineage of professionals with pristine reputations and a knack for never letting outsiders glimpse our private struggles. By 16, I'd learned how to keep my face neutral and my heart guarded. I was the epitome of a disciplined daughter, punctual, well-mannered, academically excellent. My parents expected nothing less. Growing up in Boston shaped me into a person who took pride in sharp edges, crisp suits, pointed retorts, perfect outlines for every project. Even the city's bristling winters and stoic brownstones mirrored my internal world. Lovely to behold, but not exactly easy to breach. I thrived at Harvard, storming through undergrad at the top of my class. Then came law school, where I perfected the art of debate. Nobody was going to out-argue me, outsmart me, or, heaven forbid, out-control me. And so I stepped into my legal career with the unwavering confidence that I could handle whatever it threw at me. Yet, life has a way of blindsiding you. All the logic in the world can't shield you from that first lightning bolt of unexpected desire. And trust me, I tried. I fought tooth and nail against it. But Emily was the unstoppable force to my immovable object. She was the first person who ever made me realize that emotions, even messy, heated, uncontainable ones, could be worth the risk. Emily and I met at Rosen & Galloway, a mid-sized law firm in Boston's financial district. I was a relatively new associate then, hustling to make partner before I turned 35, with a meticulous plan for each rung of the career ladder. Emily arrived a few months after I did, transferring in from a West Coast firm. She was everything I was not, outwardly relaxed. Hair sometimes pinned up haphazardly, easy with a smile or a laugh even when tensions ran high. Yet beneath that easygoing exterior, she possessed an intellect that matched mine, a lethal quick wit, a brilliant sense of strategy. The first time we really spoke was during an associates meeting where we all sat around a polished oak table, tension thick as we prepped for a major corporate lawsuit. Emily made a casual remark that sliced straight to the core of the argument, undercutting my carefully prepared angle. I remember bristling. How dare she waltz in here, so nonchalant, and poke holes in my logic? But as her hazel eyes met mine across the table, an odd thrill shot up my spine. The gaze she gave me wasn't mocking or dismissive, but it brimmed with a kind of playful curiosity, like she was challenging me to match wits, to push back. My pulse kicked up. I cleared my throat, calmly refuted her points, and the conversation moved on. Yet the rest of that meeting, I felt her attention lingering on me. It was like standing beneath a warm spotlight that I couldn't decide if I loved or hated. From that day forward, our rivalry grew into a strange sort of dance. We'd both volunteer for the same high-stakes cases, vying to impress the partners. We'd trade barbs in the corridor, each remark barbed enough to keep the other on our toes but never truly cruel. There was always the unspoken sense that this was fun, as if we shared a secret that neither of us had the nerve to speak aloud. And somewhere, in the swirl of late nights at the office and early morning strategy sessions, I realized I was looking forward to seeing her. The first time I admitted that to myself while reviewing files in my immaculate little corner office, I nearly slammed the folder shut out of pure denial. Attraction was inconvenient, dangerous. Emily was a coworker, a competitor, and possibly my biggest distraction. I told myself it was just a fleeting interest, that it would pass. But then there were the fleeting glances across the conference room, the subtle brush of her hand against my shoulder when she walked behind me, the times she'd murmur, "Good morning, counselor," in a way that felt personal, intimate, even though the words were completely professional. My blood would hum in my veins, and I'd fight to keep my expression neutral. We never spoke of it. Not directly, but the tension simmered, and neither of us truly wanted it to dissipate. A few months later, the partners decided to hold a celebratory dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown, a place so discreetly expensive it didn't even bother with a sign outside. It was the firm's way of honoring a big win in a grueling corporate case. one Emily and I had both contributed to. We arrived in our sharpest suits, each stepping carefully across the polished floors, conscious of the watchful eyes of our colleagues. I'd chosen a slim, charcoal gray skirt suit, accentuating my figure just enough to feel confident, but not so much as to appear unprofessional. Emily, however, wore dark slacks and a white silk blouse, the top button undone, revealing a flash of collarbone that kept my gaze wandering when it shouldn't. At one point, we made eye contact across the foyer, and a slow smile curved her lips. Heat flared in my cheeks, and I quickly turned away, heart drumming. We were seated at a long table near the center of the restaurant, each seat marked with a little name card. Our firm's name was elegantly embossed on them, along with each guest's name in ornate lettering. Emily and I ended up side by side, no doubt the result of some partner who found our friendly rivalry amusing. I tried to act nonchalant, greeting everyone with my usual polite nods and half smiles. The conversation swelled around us. The senior partners toasted the firm's success, wine glasses clinking, as servers quietly refilled water and wine. The restaurant lights were low, candles flickering in the center of the table, each flame reflected in the polished silverware. My mind was half on the conversation about our next potential client, half on Emily's presence so close to me I could feel the warmth radiating off her. We were discussing a complex intellectual property lawsuit with one of the partners when it happened. I felt something under the table, light, grazing, a brush of fingers against my knee. My entire body tensed. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined it, but then I felt it again, more deliberate this time. My heart lurched. I glanced at Emily, but she was engaged in conversation with the partner, her expression composed. She didn't look at me. Then, ever so calmly, her hand slid onto my knee again, and her fingers curled around it. My breath caught in my throat. This was insane. We were surrounded by colleagues. Anyone could glance over and notice. The idea made adrenaline spike through my system, and if I was honest, a surge of something undeniably electric. My father's voice echoed in my mind, scolding me about always maintaining composure in public. My mother's standards pressed down on me. Never show your cards. A single flicker of my face could give everything away. But as Emily's hand settled on my leg, I found myself powerless to pull away. That was the moment everything changed. In the midst of polite chatter and gentle music, Emily laced her fingers through mine beneath the table. My pulse thundered so loudly that I was sure someone at the table would hear it. But no one even glanced our way, each person lost in their own conversation. Emily remained poised, her voice steady as she discussed legal precedents with our boss, her face a picture of professional calm. Only her eyes, when they darted toward mine, held a spark of pure challenge. Time stretched. My skin felt feverish where her fingers rested. The tablecloth concealed us from any onlookers. Yet I knew if anyone stood up and glanced down, they'd see the intimate link of our hands, fingers interwoven, as though we were lovers brazenly ignoring the corporate environment. My mind screamed at me to do something, pull away, laugh it off, or confront her in some subtle manner. But I did none of those. Because the truth was, deep down, I wanted that contact. My breath came quicker, my cheeks burned, and a swirl of desire woke in my stomach, tying itself into knots. Emily's thumb brushed a circle across the back of my hand, a tiny motion that sent shivers racing across my spine. "Isn't that right, Olivia?" The voice of one of the partners jolted me. I realized the table had fallen silent, everyone awaiting my response. I had no idea what the question was. My brain scrabbled for context, but all I could focus on was Emily's hand, her skin warm against mine. I cleared my throat, praying my face didn't look as flushed as it felt. "Yes," I said, hoping that was a safe response. "Exactly." Apparently, it was good enough. The partner nodded, satisfied, and conversation resumed. Emily's eyes flicked to me again, and she smirked, a silent acknowledgement that she just watched me scramble. I found myself torn between annoyance and a nearly overwhelming rush of excitement. This was a game to her, a delicious, maddening game that I had never truly let myself play until now. By the time dessert arrived, a decadent platter of petit fours and molten chocolate cake slices, Emily's hand had gone from holding mine to lightly stroking my thigh under the table. The first time she slid her palm there, I tensed so hard I nearly knocked over my wine glass. She gave a tiny laugh that only I could hear and pressed her palm flatter, creeping upward by slow degrees. Panic and longing mixed in my chest. She wouldn't, she can't, not here. My mind spun, and yet, The glint in her eyes when I risked a sideways glance told me that yes, indeed, she would. When the dinner finally ended and everyone began rising from their chairs, I practically leapt to my feet, my face radiating heat. Emily stood as well, smoothing her slacks with a calmness that left me breathless. She whispered, "You all right?" in a tone that dripped with faux innocence. I wanted to snap at her, to tell her how reckless she'd been, but all I could muster was a glare that melted halfway under the weight of a desire I refused to name. My chest felt tight. Everything in me warred between scolding her and dragging her aside to do what, exactly? Emily's lips curved in that maddening half-smile. She leaned in close so only I could hear her whisper, "You coming with me? Or do you need more convincing?" Those words flared like a match in the dark. In my mind, 1,000 protests formed. This was wrong, risking our professional standing, my sense of control. But beneath that logic, a surging wave of want crashed through my defenses. I managed a nod, half-dazed, and she smirked, placing a businesslike hand on my arm as though guiding me toward the exit for a perfectly normal conversation. I had no idea where we were going or how this would end. All I knew was that Emily had ignited something inside me, something that refused to be extinguished by reason or caution, and in that moment, I gave in. The rest of the night blurred. I remember stammering out a flimsy excuse to my colleagues about needing to take care of some urgent matter. Emily calmly suggested we share a cab, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The next thing I knew, we were stepping out into the lobby of a nearby hotel, a towering, elegant building with quiet corners and plush carpeting. Don't ask me who arranged it. Perhaps it was Emily's spontaneous decision, or maybe she'd planned it all along. My thoughts tumbled so frantically that I could barely piece together what was happening. All I knew was that my heart pounded in my chest and every nerve in my body felt alive. The doorman greeted us politely. Emily gave a short nod in return, steering me toward a bank of elevators. My rational brain told me to run, to extricate myself from this insane scenario. I was about to cross a line I'd never even dared to approach before. But then I remembered the warmth of Emily's hand under the table, the unspoken promise in her eyes, and a knot of longing pulled me forward. The elevator was sleek, lined with mirrored panels that reflected our images back at us. The doors slid shut with a soft chime, sealing us inside. We were alone. The second they clicked into place, I felt the tension in the air triple. Emily pivoted to face me, her gaze flickering with determination. Without preamble, she reached for me, her fingers cupping the back of my neck. I gasped, parting my lips to speak, but her mouth covered mine before I could form a word. The kiss was a jolt of electricity that rocketed through my veins. Every sense sharpened. The subtle floral scent of her shampoo, the taste of peppermint gum on her breath, the cool press of the elevator's mirrored wall against my shoulder blades as she angled me backward. She kissed me like she'd been waiting for it all her life, as though all our half-teasing, half-testing banter had led to this single moment. My mind spun, half telling me to keep calm, half begging me to let go. And let go I did. I grabbed hold of her waist, fingers bunching in the crisp fabric of her blouse. We stumbled slightly as the elevator ascended, but neither of us broke away. I was dimly aware that if the doors opened and someone stepped in, we'd be in a precarious situation. But the adrenaline thrumming in my bloodstream drowned out that concern. "God," Emily whispered against my lips, her voice low and breathless. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to do this." I tried to respond, but only a helpless sound left my throat. She seized the opportunity to deepen the kiss, and I sank into the sensation. My rational mind was nowhere to be found, replaced by raw hunger that refused to be civilized. Suddenly, a soft tone announced our arrival. The elevator doors slid open on a deserted hallway. Emily pulled back, chest rising and falling rapidly, her eyes bright. We stumbled out together, my shoes clicking unevenly on the polished floor. She led me to a door at the far end of the corridor, sliding a keycard from her pocket. I realized she must have checked us in at the front desk while I was in some haze. Or maybe she'd reserved the room earlier. The possibilities made my head spin. The door clicked open. We spilled into the room, flicking on the lights to reveal a modern suite with a plush king-sized bed, soft gray carpeting, and a window offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. But I barely registered any of that because Emily was pushing me back against the closed door, reclaiming my mouth with hers. "You like it when I provoke you, don't you?" she murmured, her lips skimming my jaw, trailing a path that made me shudder. I wanted to deny it, to cling to my composure, but the truth fought its way out. "You're impossible," I managed. A soft laugh rumbled in her throat. "But you want me anyway." Her words were a challenge and a confession. I answered by tangling my fingers in her hair and pulling her close. Our clothes, so carefully chosen for the firm's dinner, were quickly coming untucked and unfastened. My neatly pressed blouse was halfway out of my skirt, and her pristine blouse's first 2 buttons had popped open. My control, my treasured shield, was unraveling at warp speed, and I didn't care. We lost ourselves in the rush. Skin on skin, frantic kisses, muffled moans. For a moment, I felt like a different version of myself, someone not bound by the rigid expectations of my parents, or the structured image I strove to uphold at work. This was purely for me, for the thrill of being wanted, of wanting someone so powerfully in return. There was no going back. In the aftermath, the room was dark except for the faint glow of the city lights seeping through the window. I lay there, heartbeat gradually settling, body still humming with the memory of Emily's touch. She was stretched out beside me, one arm draped over my waist. My mind drifted in and out of a dreamlike state, lulled by the warmth of her body against mine. But eventually, the flurry of sensations mellowed, and reality crept in. My old friend, fear, slid into the room like a sly intruder. Fear of what this meant for my career, for my carefully guarded reputation. Fear of the precarious line I'd just crossed with a coworker. Fear of what it meant to actually let someone see me vulnerable. I tried to keep my breathing steady, not wanting Emily to sense the growing panic in my chest. But somehow, she seemed to know. She shifted, propping herself on one elbow, her features partially obscured by the darkness. "You're thinking too much?" she said, her voice soft. A humorless laugh escaped me. "I always think too much," she reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "So tell me what's going on in that brain of yours." I swallowed hard. I wasn't used to sharing my feelings, certainly not with someone who ignited them in the first place. But there was something about Emily's gaze, steady, unflinching, that prompted honesty. "I'm scared," I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "This is new, and it's risky. We work together. The partners might not like it if they find out. And I don't want to lose everything I've built because of a lapse in judgment." The last words stuck in my throat, feeling cruel even as I spoke them. She frowned, pulling back slightly. Is that what this was? A lapse in judgment? The hurt in her tone twisted my gut. I shook my head. "No, that's not what I mean." But I gestured helplessly. "I've spent my entire life trying to keep my emotions locked down. I wasn't prepared for you." Silence lingered, and my heart pounded. Finally, she sighed and leaned in, pressing her forehead to mine. "I get it," she murmured, her breath warm against my lips. "This is complicated, but sometimes you can't ignore something real because you're afraid of potential consequences." Tears stung at my eyes. I hated showing emotions so blatantly. It's not just consequences at work. It's me, who I thought I was, how I defined myself. "You're messing with my head." A wry smile tugged at her lips. "Because you like losing control a little bit, don't you?" I wanted to deny it. Wanted to preserve the illusion that I could revert to calm, collected Olivia at any moment. But the truth was, the thrill of letting go, of letting her guide me past my own boundaries, was addictive. With a shaky breath, I pressed my face against the curve of her neck, inhaling her scent. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for all this," I whispered. Her arm tightened around me. "Then let's figure it out step by step. No need to plan the whole future tonight." Part of me longed to cling to her promise, to believe we could navigate these waters one gentle wave at a time. Another part recognized that tangling ourselves in each other's lives would inevitably create storms. But I was too exhausted to keep resisting. For the first time in my life, I felt a semblance of safety in someone else's arms, as though it was okay not to have all the answers. Gradually, my mind quieted enough for sleep to sneak in. My last conscious thought was that tomorrow, everything might look different in the daylight. But for now, I let her warmth lull me under. I woke to the pale light of dawn filtering through the curtains. For a hazy moment, I didn't remember where I was or why. Then I felt Emily's presence beside me, her arm draped over my stomach, her leg tangled with mine beneath the sheets. The intimate familiarity of it sent a jolt of surprise through my chest. I lay there, heartbeat picking up as memory flooded back. I half expected guilt to crash over me like a tidal wave, but instead, I felt oddly content. Maybe this was just the calm before the storm, but for those precious seconds, I let myself savor the warmth of her body, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. Then her eyelashes fluttered, and she stirred. A slow smile tugged at her lips as she opened her eyes. "Morning," she rasped. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Morning." For a few seconds, we simply gazed at each other, a silent acknowledgement of what we'd done, what we'd shared. Then practicality reasserted itself in my mind. "We probably need to get going soon," I muttered, glancing at the clock on the bedside table. "We have work." Emily yawned, stretching languidly. Right, back to the daily grind. She didn't move to get up, though. Instead, she shifted closer, brushing a soft kiss against my shoulder. "Do you regret last night?" The question pulsed with significance. I took a moment to answer, searching my feelings. "No," I said softly. "It might terrify me, but I don't regret it." Relief and a hint of satisfaction lit her face. She pressed another gentle kiss to my collarbone, sending tingles through me. "Good," she whispered, "because I don't regret it either." We managed to tear ourselves away from the warmth of the bed, each taking a quick shower in turn. The suite's bathroom was spacious and modern, but I couldn't fully enjoy it. My nerves were too taut, hyper-aware that in less than an hour, we'd be stepping into the law firm as colleagues. This double life felt precarious, like walking a tightrope. A small pang of uncertainty struck me as I put on my rumpled clothes from the night before, smoothing out the wrinkles with my hands. Emily did the same, slipping into her slacks and blouse with a carefree ease. Her hair was damp, curling slightly around her shoulders. She caught me watching her in the mirror and shot me a wink. My stomach flipped. We didn't speak much on the elevator ride down to the lobby. The tension was thick, not in a negative sense, but loaded with the awareness that we were crossing from a private realm into public space. Once we reached the lobby, I stepped off first, scanning for any sign of prying eyes or familiar faces. But the coast was clear, just a bored-looking concierge scrolling on his phone. Emily followed a step behind me. Outside, the morning bustle had begun in earnest. Cars, cabs, and the occasional cyclist wove along the street. People in suits clutched paper cups of coffee, rushing to their destinations. We hailed a taxi, both of us sliding into the back seat. I gave the driver the address of the law firm, my voice more clipped than usual. During the ride, Emily reached for my hand. I stiffened, then glanced at the driver's reflection in the rearview mirror. He didn't seem to be paying attention to us at all, but paranoia flickered. With a quiet sigh, I let her fingers intertwine with mine, ignoring the flurry of nerves in my stomach. She seemed to sense my apprehension because she slowly withdrew her hand, giving me a small, understanding nod. We didn't need words to convey the complexities swirling between us. We both wanted to touch, to hold, but we also knew we had to tread carefully. When we arrived at the firm, we exited the taxi one after the other. Emily paused on the sidewalk, her gaze flicking to me. "We should talk later, figure out how we handle this," I nodded, swallowing. "Yeah, later." We strode into the lobby, our footsteps echoing on the polished marble floor. The front desk security guard recognized us, greeting us by name. I forced a polite smile, mindful of how my heart hammered. Everyone I passed felt like a potential threat, someone who might suspect, who might realize how drastically my relationship with Emily had changed. Inside the elevator, we stood with a small group of other employees. For once, we didn't exchange a single glance. By the time we reached our floor, we stepped off into the corridor, already adopting the professional masks we wore so well. She murmured, "See you around," and turned in the direction of her office. I stayed rooted for a moment, a mix of longing and trepidation swirling in my chest. Then I headed to my office, bracing myself for the day's work and the avalanche of emotions I'd have to keep at bay. The following days passed in a strange limbo. On the surface, Emily and I remained perfectly professional. We attended meetings, collaborated on briefs, even engaged in our usual banter about legal strategies. To any casual observer, nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Every time we passed each other in the hallway, a flicker of heat ignited behind my ribcage. When we stepped into an empty elevator or found ourselves briefly alone in the break room, the air practically crackled with tension. Neither of us addressed it openly. Maybe we were both afraid that naming this thing between us would bring it crashing down. Meanwhile, my mind wrestled with a whirl of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted more. More stolen nights. More of Emily's laughter. More of that sense of liberation she evoked in me. Another part cautioned that I was in over my head. The law firm was my entire future. I couldn't risk tarnishing my reputation or my ambition. And what if my parents found out? The thought made me break out in a cold sweat, imagining their disapproval. Then, one late afternoon, I received a text message on my phone as I sat at my desk. It was from Emily. "Dinner tomorrow." My heart fluttered. I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading those two words until they blurred. Anxiety and excitement danced in my veins. I typed and retyped my reply a dozen times before settling on one. Yes. Immediately, a swirl of adrenaline pulsed through me. By accepting, I was taking another step deeper into this, into her, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. The night we agreed to meet, I tried to calm my nerves by working late, but the clock ticked relentlessly, and eventually I had to close my laptop, gather my belongings, and head to the small restaurant near Faneuil Hall where we'd agreed to meet. It was a cozy place, candlelit, with tables spaced just far enough for conversation to be private. Soft jazz played overhead, barely audible over the low hum of diners' conversations. I arrived first. My stomach churned as I waited, glancing at my reflection in the restaurant's broad window. I'd worn a navy wrap dress, understated yet flattering, but now I second-guessed every detail. Was I trying too hard? Should I have chosen something more casual? I was so absorbed in self-criticism that I almost didn't notice Emily slipping into the seat across from me until I heard her voice. "Hey!" My gaze snapped up. She wore a deep emerald blouse with tailored black pants, her hair down, framing her face. A small, tentative smile curved her lips, betraying a hint of her own nervousness. Something about that vulnerability made me breathe easier. "Hi," I managed, smiling back. For a moment, we just stared at each other, letting the tension settle. Then a server appeared, offering menus and taking our drink orders. I requested a glass of Chardonnay, Emily a glass of Merlot. We placed them down once they arrived, the server drifting away, leaving us in a little bubble of candlelight and unspoken questions. "So," she began softly, folding her hands in her lap, "how have you been?" A strangled laugh escaped me. "You see me at the office every day." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not what I'm asking. How have you been?" I hesitated, swirling my wine in its glass. "I'm adjusting, trying to figure out what I want." She nodded. "And do you have an answer?" That was the question, wasn't it? The question that had hounded me every moment since we left that hotel room. I inhaled, meeting her gaze across the table. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I know I don't want to just pretend nothing happened." Relief flickered across her face. "Neither do I." The conversation eased into a gentler rhythm. We talked about safer topics at first. Our families, our career goals. I told her about my father's exacting standards, my mother's relentless focus on achievement. She mentioned her laid-back West Coast upbringing, the ways in which her parents encouraged her to chase whatever sparked her passion. Hearing that made me feel a pang of envy. I couldn't imagine the freedom of being raised without the weight of unspoken expectations. By the time we'd finished our entrees, the tension had settled into something softer, more intimate. Emily sipped her Merlot, eyes warm as they roamed my face. "I want to keep seeing you," she said. "Outside of work, obviously, but I also know we need to be careful." I swallowed, nodding. "I do too. I just need time, and we can't let it compromise us at the firm." She reached across the table, sliding her hand toward mine. I hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one from Rosen and Galloway was lurking in a corner. Then I placed my hand in hers. Our fingers entwined, so reminiscent of that night under the table, but this time it was in full view, no tablecloth to hide behind. A delicate thrill rippled through me. "No rush," she said, squeezing gently, "but I'm not going anywhere." My heart soared and constricted at once, torn between hope and worry. But in that candlelit moment, hope held the upper hand. In the weeks that followed, Emily and I navigated a delicate balancing act. By day, we remained professional. Yes, there were lingering gazes, brushes of hands when no one was looking, subtle text messages that could make my pulse pound. But outwardly, we were the same two attorneys we'd always been, dedicated to our cases, occasionally sparring over strategy, impressing the partners with our results. By night, when we had the chance, we explored each other. Sometimes that meant a rushed meal at a tucked-away bistro, our knees touching under the table as we laughed about the day's office antics. Other times, it was a stolen weekend afternoon, leaving the city behind to wander coastal trails. the crisp air filling our lungs as we swapped personal stories we'd never dared confide to anyone else. Our relationship was still undefined, but it was real, and it was ours. Each step felt like crossing a minefield, unsure which wrong move could blow our cover. Yet we both realized that if we truly cared about each other, we'd find a way to make it work. One evening, I even took the bold step of inviting her to my apartment, a small but tidy place in Beacon Hill. Normally, I kept that space as a private sanctuary from the demands of work and the expectations of my family. But letting Emily in felt like the next test, the next piece of vulnerability I was ready to share. She arrived carrying a bottle of Pinot Noir, wearing a sweater that matched the green flecks in her eyes. I fussed in the kitchen, preparing a simple pasta dish, my nerves running high. But the moment she stepped behind me, slipped her arms around my waist, and rested her chin on my shoulder, something inside me melted. "This is nice," she murmured, inhaling the scent of tomato sauce. "Domestic, even." I rolled my eyes in playful exaggeration. "Careful. Next you'll say I'm turning soft." She chuckled, pressing a kiss to my cheek. "I like seeing this side of you, outside the suits and the stern face in the office." Heat warmed my cheeks. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation for being unflappable." We ended up curled on my sofa, half-eaten plates of pasta on the coffee table, the wine bottle half-finished. The city lights glowed through my windows, illuminating Emily's face as she asked me about my childhood dreams, the things I'd given up to pursue the law. My chest tightened at the thought of those old regrets. Had I lost pieces of myself along the way, in an effort to become the perfect lawyer, the perfect daughter? She listened, that thoughtful gaze never wavering, and when she spoke, her words were gentle, yet cutting through my defenses. "You don't have to carry all of that alone. Let people in, Olivia. Let me in." I closed my eyes, letting my head rest against her shoulder. Maybe for the first time, I believed I could do exactly that. Of course, life rarely offers such sweetness without a sting of reality. Not long after, a rumor began circulating at the firm. Whispers that Emily and I were spending time together, some alleged sightings of us laughing over coffee outside the office. I panicked, worrying that it would get back to the partners, that I'd be called in for a stern lecture on professionalism. But to my surprise, the rumor never caught traction. The pace of corporate law meant everyone was too busy to chase gossip. Even if someone suspected something, the firm was tolerant enough to let it slide as long as it didn't interfere with work. Nonetheless, we knew we couldn't be careless. We quietly agreed to keep our relationship mostly under wraps. Publicly, we were colleagues. Privately, we allowed ourselves the deepening bond that had become too precious to deny. And so, here I am now, sometime after that first electric dinner. Emily remains the single person capable of making me lose my carefully maintained composure with a single look. We still banter, still challenge each other to be better lawyers. But behind the scenes, there's a closeness I never thought I'd be brave enough to pursue, a sense that I can be myself, messy emotions and all, without fear of judgment. Our story is far from over. We'll face more challenges, no doubt, ranging from case conflicts to the possibility of bigger personal decisions. Yet despite my parents' teachings, I've realized that the vulnerability I once viewed as a weakness can, in fact, be my greatest strength. Because letting Emily close has shown me that true connection isn't about never breaking. It's about finding someone who holds your hand when you do. If you asked me whether I ever expected to be in this situation, falling for a rival colleague, sneaking heated glances in conference rooms, letting my heart tumble out of its cage, I would have laughed you out of the building. But life, it seems, has a sense of humor. Sometimes, all it takes is a hand under the table to topple the defenses you spent a lifetime building. And you? Have you ever met someone who made you lose all sense of control?